Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a Perfumers Portfolio video, actually a ranked Perfumers Portfolio video. And I will tell you that this particular type of video I've slacked a little bit on doing because there are many fragrances that some of these perfumers have created that I just haven't smelled. And so the whole idea, if you're kind of new to the channel, is that I wanted to create a video archive of fragrances in my collection from a particular perfumer. However, the other part of the idea was that I wanted to kind of give the perfumer some credit and give them their flowers, if you will, because many of the perfumers, especially the old timers from back in the day, they were never mentioned. It was always kind of the corporation, the YSLs, the Dior's, all of that stuff were the front and center. The perfumers were always pushed to the back, so much so that many of the perfumers, like, for example, Edward Fleischier, who made Dior's Poison, wasn't even invited to the premiere of his own fragrance, you know? And so stuff like that, I think, and Frederick Malle tells the story that that was the moment where he knew he wanted to kind of change things, and he did. Frederick Malle created his own brand where the perfumer's name is on the bottle, and that has become more and more prominent as time has come on. But I thought it would be a good idea to kind of do these videos highlighting the perfumers, because whenever you get into fragrance hardcore, like whenever you get into fragrance the way that we are into fragrance, you begin to notice certain things that maybe the average person who smells a fragrance here and there doesn't. Number one, you begin to notice trends in perfumery year by year. And that's one of the reasons why I created This Year in Perfume. So I've done a couple list videos that I thought were far enough off the beaten path where I'm not just doing top 10 designer fragrances for men day in and day out like Jeremy. No offense, he has so many more subscribers and views and anything and everything than I do. But I wanted to put out content that was different. I wanted to put out something that was unique, something that was intellectual, something that would make you think as a perfume lover, and maybe see things a little bit differently, right? So I came up with a handful of these quote-unquote list videos. One was This Year in Perfume, which highlights the year that the fragrances were made. And there's playlists for all of these. If you're newer to the channel and you want to kind of check that out, you can go to the playlist, watch all of the This Year in Perfume. And then I went back and I ranked them. So there's tons of lists on the channel. And the other type of list I did was called This Is Not a Top 10, where we highlight a particular note. This is kind of the third type that I think gets pushed to the back burner a little bit, mostly because I always feel like there's more to get to know about a perfumer's creations before I do these videos. But the other side of the coin is that if I don't do these videos with the small amount that I have, then the perfumer doesn't get highlighted. So today, we're going to talk about 9 fragrances. We're going to talk about 9. So this is going to be a top 9 ranked video. I wanted to have one more to make it a top 10. I just don't, so it's impossible for me to do that. I'm so close to having 10, but I've been waiting and waiting and waiting to do this, and I figure there's some rumors going around that I wanted to discuss with you guys, so I figured now is the time. And we're going to do a ranked Perfumers Portfolio video on Quentin Bisch, who is very close in age to me. I believe he's maybe a year or so older. I think he's 40 or so, and I'm 39. So you can see he's from the newer school of perfume thought and the way fragrances are created. He's definitely from the new school, the old school of the Jean-Claude Alenas, the Pierre Bourdons, the Dominique Ropions are beginning to kind of get phased out, and the new school of perfumers are really coming in, and Quentin Bisch is seen as one of the brightest, and well, he used to be seen as a rising star. Now I think he really is seen as one of the main young star perfumers out there. He's done work for, he works for Givaudan currently, but he did work for Robertet, Carolina Herrera, Mugler, Jean-Paul Gaultier, and many others. We'll discuss today some of the niche brands he did work for as well, like Amouage and Marc-Antoine Barrois, Lil Barrois. And so he made his debut in the fragrance world in 2010, in the fine fragrance world, I should say, in 2010. And he's best known for his use of very bold type of accords, you know. He I always think of him as kind of one of those perfumers that uses every synthetic in the book. Like, it just feels like he piles every synthetic you can imagine in some of these fragrances, and yet it still does work, I must admit. He was born in Strasbourg, France. He graduated from the Givaudan Perfumery School, and there's actually an interesting story behind how he graduated or how he got into that school, because he's had a lifelong love of fragrances, okay, and perfumery. And he wanted to pursue that for a career when he was younger, but he was scientifically, let's just say, ungifted as a student. Maybe he just wasn't a good student. I don't know. Um, but he was told he could never gain admittance into this elite training academy, if you will. And so he began to pursue something different. He said, okay, well, I'm going to have to start a career doing something different. And he went to school to be a dancer and a theater performer, basically was his plan, if you will. But even while running this theater company, he continued to kind of lobby the gatekeepers and lobby his friends at the training school just to try to kind of get in, if you will, okay? So finally, Givaudan gave him a shot, okay? And what's interesting about them giving him a shot is that he lacked one very important element that most schools see as essential, and that is a degree in chemistry. And the reason is because when you're working with perfumery ingredients, having a background in chemistry is like kind of the basic building blocks. So it's very hard for somebody off the street. Like, I love perfume, but I know it would be damn near impossible for me to walk into a Givaudan lab and create a perfume. You know, you have to know the basics. You have to know what you're doing. And so it's very rare to see someone that doesn't have that background in chemistry be given a shot. And there's actually a YouTube, there's a video on YouTube, and I forget what it's called. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, leave it in the comments. But there is a video that kind of follows some of these students going through the perfumery school. And one of the shots is of Quentin Bisch when he first hears the news that he is being admitted to this school. And you could just see how unbelievably happy he was. And of course, there's only like 5 or 10 students. Some very small amount gets admitted each year to this school. And so, but I would urge you to watch that program if you can find it. It's worth kind of seeing what they go through. The instructor was kind of teaching them to smell a particular, ingredient that they were smelling and try to pick it out of a composition. And there's a very interesting clip of him, though, while he's sitting while the cameras are following the students around. And I think his instructor takes him to like a clary sage field or something. And he's sitting there. They want him to smell the clary sage. But then Quentin Bisch just lays down in the field, looks up at the stars or looks up at the sky. It's daytime, and says, I wish I could come back here at night to look up at the stars, look up at the sky, and just be alone and just think, this is a perfect spot to create. And that's kind of how it feels. It feels like he, just feels electric when he talks about perfume. Like, he really makes it all encompassing. He wants to be passionate about it and make it exciting and sensual and emotional and stuff like that. So today we're going to talk about 9 fragrances from my collection that were created by Quentin Bisch. The rumor that is floating around, and one of the reasons why I thought this would be a good time to do this video, is that there is a French magazine, and I forget the name, I bet you Rich Mitch knows, but there is a French magazine who posted an article saying that, and it's a respectable magazine, it's not like the National Enquirer or, something you're picking up on the way out of a grocery store in the checkout line. It's a respectable French magazine, and they were saying that Hermes is giving serious consideration to making Quentin Bisch the next in-house perfumer for Hermes, which is huge news because any perfumer, a job like being the in-house perfumer at Hermes means you are at the top. I mean, you are at the pinnacle. Hermes could literally pick anybody they want in the industry, and that person would drop whatever they're doing and go be in-house perfumer at Hermes. But what's interesting about that, though, is that appointment, let's say if it happens, is that Quentin Bisch's style is completely opposite from what you would expect from Hermes, Quentin Bisch uses a lot of harsh, scratchy synthetics that feel very modern, very amber, woody, and all of this good stuff, right? And Hermes doesn't use a lot of these modern synthetics and all this stuff. A lot of their fragrances feel very natural. Even the vintage fragrances back in the day, like the heavier Hermes fragrances like Bel Ami don't feel like they're filled with modern synthetics. Of course, there weren't modern synthetics back then, but it's not filled with amber woods and stuff like that. Even the newer stuff that they've done as they've come into the future. Hermes has always been very careful to keep themselves at arm's length of, you know, what everyone else is doing. Obviously, you have to follow trends in some aspect, or you have to create a trend. But they don't want to be associated with everyone else. They want to be seen as luxury, as you know, as so good that even if you have the money, you can't buy it because you have to work your way up to it. You have to get to the status kind of thing. You know, it's a real status symbol. And so they have to be very careful about everyone all of a sudden wearing an Hermes, or because they want to be seen as separate. They want to be seen as unique. They want to be seen as different. So I think that's an interesting little rumor. I'll be curious to see how it all pans out, because I know Christine Nagel is a good in-house perfumer, but I will say that outside of things like Gallo and maybe what she did with the original H24, which I didn't like any of the flankers. I didn't like all the flankers. Well, I haven't smelled all of them, but many of the flankers of Terre that I've smelled didn't excite me. I would probably just wear the original. And so I think she's a good perfumer, but for some reason, I don't think it's meshed perfectly. But I feel like implementing Quentin Bisch into Hermes's current structure would be like the management at Hermes sort of dragging Hermes into 2024, kicking and screaming. You know, like they don't want to go. Quentin Bisch would almost force them to, by the way he perfumes. It'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting story to kind of follow along with. But let's do a top 9. This won't take too long because there's only 9 fragrances. And some of these I pre-sprayed. The first 3 I pre-sprayed just to remind myself of, because it's been a while since I've smelled some of these more designer versions that he created. So the first one, number 9 on the list, and by far my most despised creation by Quentin Bisch, let's say, is also, surprise, surprise, one of the most... I would say successful or most popular brands, perfumes that he created. There are, I mean, it feels like thousands of YouTube videos on this fragrance, praising it, hyping it. This was a huge hype beast 5 or 6 years ago, and it's called Azzaro's Wanted by Night, and maybe one of the tackiest sort of bottles you've ever seen, with this revolver bottle with the bullets in there. Just absolutely tacky as all get out. Came out in 2018, and it is extremely sweet. I've got maybe an hour or 2 dry down here. It's just, I mean, it's just modern designer fragrance in this big blob format to me. I really don't like the way that all of it comes together. You know, I think this would smell amazing on a 16-year-old kid, like a 15-year-old freshman in high school or something like that, you know, because it does have this sweet, playful type aspect to it. I actually blind bought Wanted by Night based on the note listing, to be honest with you. I heard all these people hyping it, and I was like, wow, cumin, frankincense, tobacco, cypress, which is a very old school, kind of medicinal green smelling note. I don't get hardly any of that, to be honest with you. I get almost none of the notes listed in this fragrance, other than the mandarin orange and the cinnamon in the top. I really just get this blobby sweetness. I really, really despise this fragrance. I really don't like Wanted by Night, and it's crazy because I think it's one of the best sellers for this particular line, if you will. This whole line is not for me, and I don't say that to be elitist or anything like that, but I feel like depending on where you are in your journey, if you've smelled hundreds, thousands of niche fragrances in the artisanal side, and you've dove into some real ingredients and stuff like that, this is tough for you to accept. I would take the crazy stuff he does on the niche side over this any day of the week, because this is this very synthetic, gloopy, sweet smell is really all I get. Maybe the cumin adds a little bit of spice. You know, there are definitely woods in here. It's just woods, spice, sweetness is really what it is. And that sweetness feels like it's probably some modern, you know, never-ending sweet note that just goes on and on. I really struggle with that. That may not be bad for a young kid, but to me, that is just, it's a great example of everything that's wrong with modern designer perfumery. Okay, So that's number 9. Number 8 on the list is one step ahead in my eyes of Wanted by Night. And it's from 2020. And again, I don't have a bottle. It is Jean-Paul Gaultier's Le Mâle Les Parfums. Now, this used to be, I think they still call it the Eau de Parfum Intense, but the Les Parfums version is one of the million flankers that Jean-Paul Gaultier has done of Le Mâle. And the thing about Le Mâle Les Parfums that sets it apart from the original, and I despise the original, by the way. It's also one of my most hated fragrances. I can't stand the vanilla lavender combination in here. I really don't like Le Mâle. And what's crazy is I grew up with it, and so a lot of my friends wore Le Mâle growing up, but it's the exact opposite reaction I had for Polo Sport. Polo Sport was one of those fragrances a lot of my friends wore, and when I ended up finally, I never wore it in high school or anything like that, but when I finally got a bottle, it was like nostalgic for me. This, similar situation, a lot of people I knew wore it, but when I finally got a bottle, I despised it. I hated it. But I'm keeping it because I want to review it for the channel. I have a very hard time wearing something like that, but this is a little bit of a step up from the original for me, because they've used this iris, and I love iris. It's one of my favorite ingredients in perfumery. This kind of feels like you take the iris and you like crack it, you know? Like the iris just kind of splinters into many different pieces, and it doesn't make the fragrance feel as scratchy, you know? The iris here adds this powdery, like it splinters and then turns to dust and starts to kind of fall on the fragrance and rounds out all the corners. So everything you're smelling, is a little bit more rounded. Now, it is still very sweet. That is the only thing. And that's one of the reasons why you see me with a decan and not a bottle, is this is just so unbelievably sweet. I mean, but sweet and designer fragrances for men are almost just ubiquitous nowadays. You can't get away from it. There is a cardamom note in the top, although, you know, whether you pick up some of these notes in some of these designers is tough, because it's just like a ball of sweetness attacking you. So it's cardamom, iris, lavender, vanilla, and oriental woods. And if you like the way that the iris was done in fragrances like Valentino Uomo Intense or Dior Homme, you know, something like that, the iris in here is kind of comparable to the way it's used in some of those designers. Dior Homme is the best example of that, although I really do like my vintage bottle of Valentino Uomo Intense before they kind of changed the packaging with the collar. And so this is very sweet, again, but I think this is better than Francis Kirkjohn's go at creating Le Mâle. So that was actually a trio of perfumers who worked on it. Quentin Bisch, Louise Turner, and Nathalie Grazia Cetto. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but anytime you see a trio of perfumers, you know it's probably going to be designer sludge. But that's actually, you know, if you made me wear a flanker of Le Mâle, I would probably pick that over some of the other ones that I've smelled. Or I would go with the this little bad boy right here, which is called Essence de Parfum. The Essence de Parfum is actually really good, and this may be my favorite flanker. Actually, I will say this is my favorite flanker. I like the way the osmanthus and the leather kind of comes together, but the Les Parfums that Quentin Bisch created is better than the OG, in my opinion. Okay, so that was number 8. Number 7 is a Thierry Mugler fragrance, and if you're a fan of the Amen line, there are so many of these to hunt down, especially if you're a collector of discontinued, hard-to-find fragrances. The only reason I was able to get this sample is thanks to my brother, Rich Mitch, from across the pond. Thank you, my friend. This is called Thierry Mugler's Ultra Zest. And Ultra Zest came out in 2015. It is now officially discontinued, as many of those Amen flankers are. I think they all are, except for the original Amen, which is insane when you think about how many amazing flankers that line spawned. If you're not familiar with Amen, it's kind of like the one of the original gourmand fragrances for men. There was lots of patchouli, chocolatey patchouli, caramelly patchouli. It definitely had a slight gourmand leaning because it had honey and coffee and all these other notes in here. It had this tar note, the way all the notes kind of coalesced in Amen is really special. I love wearing Amen. And I love all of the flankers, including this one. I actually really like this one, but this is maybe one of my least favorite flankers. Like if I was hunting down some of the other flankers, Pure Tonka and a couple others would be ahead of this that I don't have. But again, this is Ultra Zest, and Ultra Zest, if you've never seen it, comes in this bright orange bottle, and it's got blood orange, tangerine, ginger, mint, coffee, cinnamon, black pepper, patchouli, vanilla, and tonka. So it keeps that patchouli tonka that the original is known for, but it adds this very zesty and surprisingly realistic blood orange smell in the top with tangerine. So you can see definitely very orangey. Ginger adds this little bit of zing, you know, ginger adds this like freshness. Just imagine eating sushi and then you put ginger in your mouth and it just like invigorates your taste buds. That's a little bit how ginger acts in a perfume, and some mint. And the mint here acts as more of a freshener. So you can see they're kind of trying to use these fresher notes. I would say almost going to the point of trying to make it be more wearable in the summer. I don't think this was necessarily supposed to be a summer flanker, but it almost gives off this orange creamsicle vibe that sort of, in the dry down, you really will get that Amen DNA. So even though they went with much fresher fragrances, notes in the top, ingredients in the top, as it dries down, you get more and more of kind of what you expect from Amen, that coffee and patchouli and vanilla and stuff like that. And so, you know, Jacques Huclier made this, and he made pretty much all of the Amen versions and flankers, and Quentin Bisch worked with him to create this version in 2015. So this probably was a great experience to coordinate with somebody as, someone as experienced as Jacques Huclier. I'm a big fan of his work. And so this is Ultra Zest at number 7. Okay, number 6. Now we're going to get into what I would consider the first 3. I don't want to call them throwaways, but they're not the type of fragrance creation, I think, that has the industry kind of using a telescope to zoom in on Quentin Bisch, you know? I think these niche creations are really what has put him in the spotlight, if you will. And we're going to start with, really, there's only 2 brands that I have here that we're going to discuss from here on out. Amouage and Marc-Antoine Barrois. Those are the 2 that he really has created for that I have experience with. And so number 6 on the list is from this Amouage sample set, which came out at the end of 2022, but most of the fragrances were actually released in 2023, if I'm not mistaken. And that is exactly what the case is for the first one we're going to discuss. So at number 6 on the list, we have Guidance. Now, I have an entire live stream dedicated to kind of going through these scents for the first time on film. If you're okay with some crappy video quality, you can check that out. And so Guidance is an interesting creation for him because it is sort of this very sweet and creamy, almost like a gourmand feel as well. But many of his fragrances that have been vaunted and you know, hyped in the niche world have this sort of sci-fi realism. Well, almost like not realism, but artistic sort of like you're going to another planet. I mean, they almost feel like they almost feel so like comic book like, you know, is a good way to describe it. I remember I described one of his creations like sort of putting a flower, but instead of letting you smell that flower, putting it out in space and then having you describe it. Well, you can't smell in space, so you can't smell the flower. But that's how many of his creations have this very futuristic modernity to them. And I think that's why he's become so popular. So Guidance, and I'm going to spray this because it's been a while since I've smelled it, but Guidance has pear, hazelnut, and frankincense in the top. And of course it's an Amouage, so it has the frankincense. I am not the biggest fan of hazelnut fragrances, I must say. Actually, I'm not the biggest fan of hazelnut, period. I hate hazelnut coffee. But what saves this fragrance from being a total dislike for me is the fact that they've added this Middle Eastern twist. Of course, it's Amouage, but there's osmanthus mixed with rose, jasmine sambac, and saffron. And a base of Akigala wood, which is probably what Quentin Bisch is most known for. You know, I was thinking about doing this video, and I was thinking about how many times, like in fragrance history, it was the creation of something new that vaulted these perfume houses to then new heights and doing something different. Like, for example, yesterday I did a reference video, okay? In that reference video, we talked a little bit about fougere, which is a fragrance category, very masculine in nature. Go check out my reference video if you want to learn a little bit more. And then I've got a full fougere, like this is not a top 10, and a ranked video if you want to check it out. And I even broke it down into categories and went barbershop fougere and amber fougere. So if you search like this is not a top 10, amber fougere Ramsey, you'll pull all that up. But what vaunted that, you know, to the heights that it's become is Houbigant used Coumarin's first time that Coumarin was basically extracted from the tonka bean and created Fougere Royale in the late 1800s. Same thing with Shalimar and Emeraude. When vanillin was first kind of synthesized, it was used in Shalimar and Emeraude, and then you had this new kind of fragrance category, if you will. So Akigala wood is basically, to my understanding, Akigala wood is like this Frankenstein type patchouli. It's basically this fractionated patchouli oil that Givaudan created, and it's described as woody, spicy, and floral, okay? But it doesn't smell like any patchouli you could ever imagine. You know, it smells like a patchouli you would find on Mars or something. It has this strangeness to it, this very sci-fi futuristic, like imagine imagine the early Paco Rabanne shows where everyone was wearing like metal and, you know, twisted metal here and there and aluminum foil, the girls wearing aluminum foil over their breasts and stuff like that. There was definitely this futuristic sci-fi feel back then. And that's what Akigala wood kind of reminds me of. There is some sandalwood and vanilla and ambergris and cistus in the base, they say. But I really don't like the hazelnut in this. I don't like the hazelnut in the top. Luckily, it kind of goes away. But what's left is this very sweet and creamy and fruity. I think this would smell best on probably a woman. I think this leans feminine, although it's totally unisex. Anyone can wear anything, but I think the way that this has been created is kind of, in the color scheme of the bottle is like light pink and stuff like that. You do get a lot of florals, but I like a little bit of that furry, suede-like, leathery undertone from the osmanthus, and quite frankly, from the Akigala wood. Akigala wood gives off this weird, almost like leathered, strange patchouli. Like patchouli that's into BDSM or something. I don't know. But it definitely has something weird like that going on. Akigala wood does. So Guidance is probably my least favorite of his niche line that I've tried. But I could see why somebody would like this. I'm not a fan of how scratchy Akigala wood can be. When you start to smell some of the fragrances that come higher up on the list, you'll notice he has toned it down a little bit in some. So the ranking for me is a little tough because even though I'm not the biggest fan of Akigala wood, I feel like you almost have to give him credit where credit is due for how it's influenced the rest of the fragrance industry, if you will. So anyways, Guidance by Amouage comes in at number 6. Number 5 is a Marc-Antoine Barrois, and it is called Encelade. So Encelade I have yet to review on the channel. However, it is quite frankly one of the largest and strongest, my whole room is going to smell like Encelade now, but it is one of the strongest fragrances I've ever smelled in my life, ever. I mean, ever, ever, ever. Encelade. All right, here we go. God help us all. I have to pray before I spray with this one. Ugh. Man. and between Guidance and Encelade and all of the stuff coming up, oh my God, it is humongous. So the first time I smelled this, I was like, wow, that is a big kind of Middle Eastern, Le Labo style, like rose and woody thing, right? And then when I got the note listing, there's no rose, which really shocked me. I thought for sure this was a big sort of rose type fragrance. And maybe there's some notes in here that are giving this rosy accord that's not listed, but actually what it is rhubarb. And I'll tell you what, it is not easy to create a rhubarb fragrance. I mean, there's probably a handful I can really think of. Rhubarb kind of makes the fragrance feel tart, like there's like a tart sharpness to it. If you can imagine, if you've ever had like rhubarb pie, it almost feels like grating on your taste buds. Like, have you ever had like one taste bud that gets inflamed or whatever, and you can kind of feel it? That's how rhubarb feels to me sometimes. It can be very kind of mouth-watering, and it works well with the way Quentin Bisch creates fragrances, because many of his fragrances feel like, like really on edge. Very woody, very spicy. There is some vetiver. There's some leather in here, which I like. There's some tonka and cedar and sandalwood. But if you like, the fragrance the style of fragrance that keeps coming to mind, I don't necessarily think it smells like this, but if you like fragrances done in this style, like for example, like Promise by Frederic Malle, that big, bold, one of the strongest fragrances I've ever smelled in my life, Encelade kind of wears like that, as if every single synthetic you could ever imagine is thrown in here. I'm sure there's buckets of everything you can imagine, from ISOE Super to Ambroxan to whatever you can imagine. Ambrarome, it feels like there's everything in here. But it is very woody, and I like this. I mean, I was shocked there wasn't any rose type ingredients in here. Pomerose, rose, some kind of rose fruit, fruity floral. But maybe it's just like a missing note, or maybe my nose is picking up something that is not really highlighted. But I like what he's done with these Marc-Antoine Barrois fragrances, because they're big and bold, and they don't apologize for what they are, and that's one of the things I loved about vintage perfumery. Vintage perfumery, one of the reasons my heart is with vintage is because it knows what it is. It's big, it's bold, it's a statement maker fragrance, and many houses got away from that over the years. Of course, the 90s was kind of an exact backlash to what the 80s was. It was like the exact opposite, with the watery, aquatic-y, fresher type fragrances. But now when I smell a lot of the, big, bold fragrances, huge amber woods and stuff like that, and there may be some amber woody materials in here, but I like the way Quentin Bisch uses them. They're not used in a way like, if you want to laugh, go watch my live stream of Unique Luxury, probably my most hated niche house. They use amber woods in a way that is just disgusting and off-putting to me. One of the biggest joke of a fragrance houses I've ever smelled. And so, that is an example of how not to use amber woods. But Quentin Bisch uses these modern, let's just call them modern synthetics well, okay? All right, next on the list we have number 4. And number 4 on the list is one step ahead of Encelade, barely. Honestly, I went back and forth between number 5 and number 4. Encelade lost out by just a hair. But for number 4, we have Purpose. And again, there's a live stream on these Amouages if you really want to dive into them that I've done. Just go through my old live streams and you'll see it. So Purpose is really the fish man trying to bring Amouage into the 2020s. And it sounds like maybe that's what Hermes is going to try to do if this Quentin Bisch, rumor is true. And so Purpose takes that Akigala wood that you smell in things like Guidance and it's used, I think, even stronger in Purpose. Guidance, it's toned down a little bit because they want to give that creamy sort of floral touch. Purpose is like hardcore. Imagine like rosy, slightly lemony sort of frankincense that smells fairly fresh. You know, it doesn't necessarily smell it doesn't smell black smoke or burnt or anything like that. It smells pretty fresh, like you just kind of picked it, like you just pulled a frankincense tear off of a tree. And he's blended it with papyrus, which is a note that I really like. I usually really like papyrus fragrances because they give this papery scroll. Imagine like an old scroll lost away in a library, and imagine like burning the very brittle paper. That's a little bit what papyrus feels like. It can be very earthy, and there's some very, let's just call it modern synthetic sandalwood materials in here. I can't describe it any other way. The sandalwood in here, you know, has that Le Labo Santal 33 pickly bit to it sometimes, but it's this combination of Akigala wood and this ingredient called Mystical in the base, and not the wrapper, but Mystical and Akigala wood gives it this very futuristic, you know, very strange take on this fractionated patchouli with saffron and suede. Okay, and the saffron makes it feel very chemically. The suede adds a little bit of that velvety feel. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there was, you know, a little bit of osmanthus in here as well. Osmanthus can sometimes give off that suede accord, and he did use osmanthus in Guidance. But either way, you kind of get the idea. This very lemony, very fresh frankincense that smells like it could be slightly starting to maybe give off little wisps of incense, but mostly it's very fresh, as if you're just smelling the frankincense tear. And that's what I ended up liking about Purpose after more wears. The first time I tried it, I was very pissed off. And I feel like I have every reason to be as an Amouage fan, because, you know, I feel like what he was doing here, he did at Marc-Antoine Barrois already. So now Amouage trying to take that didn't feel like Amouage creating something new. It felt like Amouage just kind of jumping in on something, jumping in on a trend. And I didn't like that the Fishman was taking them down this route, you know? I didn't like that Renaud Salmon was taking them down this route. So, yeah, that was a little bit of a bummer to me. But I have come around to Purpose a little bit. I think it's probably turned into my favorite of these four. You know, if you said, Ramsey, you can have one bottle, I'd probably pick Purpose. With a little bit of a I'll take Purpose kind of thing. There's other Amouages I would rather have, but needless to say, it has grown on me a little bit, and it is a Quentin Bisch creation at number 4. Okay, number 3, we're gonna go back to the house of Marc-Antoine Barrois, and now from here on, actually, they're all top 3 are all Marc-Antoine Barrois, and number 3 and number 2 is cheating a little bit because one's the EDP and one's the Extrait, but number 3 is B683 Eau de Parfum. And so B683 Eau de Parfum is sort of a fragrance that came out in 2016, and it's got saffron, it's got black pepper, it's got nutmeg, and it's got this chili note. And I'm going to do a comparison video between the Eau de Parfum and the Extrait, because even though they both share the same name, they kind of go about it in different ways. So there's this chili note in B683, which is much more prominent than you're going to get in the Extrait. I feel like the Extrait, you may still get a little bit of this chili, but you get some other things in the Extrait a little bit more. There's amber, there's cistus, there's violet leaf, there's musks, ambroxan, oak moss, patchouli, and sandalwood, okay? And so it's spicy, woody, again, very modern, very, very, you know, like I said at the beginning, I can imagine some, college kid being signed to a brand new contract, wanting to smell like this, like to an NFL contract for the first time, going out with his boys, partying, celebrating, turning up, wanting to smell like this. Like the girls would want to smell. This smells very modern. It's like a glass house mansion or something. I don't know. It doesn't smell like the vintage fragrances I love. And when you smell it, the hard part about Quentin Bisch, and one of the reasons why I said I think it's going to be such a strange fit for Hermes, is that you don't smell like a top and a middle and a base normally. You're not going to get the normal progression that hardcore frag heads are used to if you're used to vintage perfumery. This type of perfumery smells totally different. So that chili note kind of hit me in the beginning. And then you just get this kind of ambroxany, woody sort of, the patchouli stands in place of the Akigala wood here. There's actual patchouli here. But it just feels so, I don't know, space age, There's like this, like you're going to get into a spacesuit and fly away or something. Which I get, maybe a new trend or something. I don't know if I would spend my money on this personally. But I'll do a comparison video. I think that would make a cool video one day. And then we're going to do B683, the Extrait. Now, the Extrait was given to me as a gift. This is number 2 on the list. The Extrait was given to me as a gift. And by, I believe it was Jeff, one of my perfume god people. Jeff sent me a bunch of fragrances. Very kind, generous. It was a gift. And, I have no problem accepting something like that from a friend because I can say whatever I want and whatever. Honestly, I'm at the point where if a brand reached out to me, I would probably just take it and say whatever I want. And then if they don't ever send me anything else, well, fuck them, But this was from a friend, and it's the Extrait of B683. Now, the Extrait is interesting because what they've done is they've added this apple accord in the top. And if you kind of know some of my previous fragrances that I've reviewed, you're going to kind of have an idea of where this is going. But apple, black pepper, cumin, Laotian oud, safraline, which is a saffron-like kind of material, like a synthetic take on saffron, if you will. I really like safraline, violet leaf, Indonesian patchouli, Australian sandalwood, and vanilla. So this, with that apple accord and that Middle Eastern style, the way he creates his fragrances feels very, the closest thing I can relate it to is Middle Eastern perfumery with their big uses of ouds and big patchoulis and rose ouds and all this stuff, right? So here, you get they've added the Laotian oud and they've added that green apple, and it really reminds you of promise. Not in smell, sort of it does with the green apple, but in style. The way this is created really feels very promise-like, and it's huge like promise. It's an Extrait. It lasts forever as well. Again, the Australian sandalwood seems a little bit pickled and scratchy. It doesn't have that smooth, milky smoothness from vintage sandalwood like you're used to smelling. And the leather note seems to be a little bit more turned up. It's like a leathery, oudy thing. But I've come to like this, and I'll do a comparison video one of these days on B683. So that only leaves number 1. And number 1 is a fragrance which on my review I really said I didn't like, and I still don't like it. I tried it very recently, actually. I sprayed this before bed, probably within the last month, I would say. And my thought on it hasn't changed, but the reason it's number 1 is because of the impact. I think that this fragrance set things off in a completely different direction. This fragrance, I think, is what kind of made him the household name, and this is Ganymede at number 1. I feel like I have to put it here, even though, I've got like a 50-minute review on Ganymede on the channel. If you really want to get into it, you can go check that out. But basically, if you just imagine sort of Ganymede, it's crazy because the most realistic note in Ganymede is that Italian Mandarin or pur, they call it. And I've often thought Ganymede, if you want me to sum it up in one word or one sentence, I would say imagine like picking the tab off of a Coca-Cola can. you know, where you open it up with the tab, and sometimes you can kind of just wiggle that tab off and put it on your tongue or under your tongue. Or if you've ever put like a penny or something on your tongue, there is this weird metallic, futuristic sort of space aged. You know, if you're not familiar, Ganymede is one of is it Jupiter's moons? Maybe, I forget, Jupiter or Saturn. I forget, one of the larger planets' moons. So obviously no one knows what Ganymede smells like. So this is a exercise in artistic perfume creation, but there's this very chemically kind of feel to this, and that comes from a huge dose. You know, saffron, sometimes saffron gives the impression like you walked into this chemical factory and you feel lightheaded, like you're gonna pass out, you know, like you're literally gonna pass out. It gives you this airy, lightheaded type feel sometimes. And there's Chinese osmanthus, absolute, or pur. There's violet. But again, in my review, I said it was like violet, but kind of thrown out to space, where you don't know what it smells like because you can't smell in space. And in space, there's this vastness, you know, like if you've ever looked through an actual telescope at like Saturn or something, which we did this when I was in college, and you realize the planet looks about this big through the telescope, and it's just eerie, like it's orbiting nothing. You know it's not orbiting nothing, it's orbiting the sun, but it looks like it's just out there on its own. And around it, all you see is black space, you know? And that's what this fragrance feels like. It feels like there's this vast emptiness, you know? That's what it feels like to me. It feels like this vast emptiness, like, and then there's you, and this vast emptiness. And sometimes real ambergris can give you the feel of what you're feeling here, but it's almost like chemically scratchy, woody Akigala wood with this. It's almost like, you know, you took a patchouli, you planted it on another planet, and it mutated into something different. You know, that's how Akigala wood feels. And then there's some Immortelle, which can have that golden, you know, if you look at the color of the bottles, this golden hay, straw-like, crunchy, crinkly straw-like feel from Immortelle. And go watch my full review if you really want my whole take on Ganymede. But I think this is the eau de parfum. They've done an Extrait, which God knows, I mean, the fact they even needed, this doesn't need an Extrait. This is Extrait strength in eau de parfum bottle. But I've never smelled the Extrait, but it does turn strangely leathery and all this different stuff that it kind of does over time. But I don't like Akigala wood turned up at such high levels, but then again, I have to almost applaud him for creating something that so changed the industry into something completely different, you know? A totally different trajectory, you know, a totally different future of fragrances because of what he created. So even though it's not my favorite, and even though I don't own a bottle, this has to be #1 for him, because this not only made his career, but it changed where the fragrance industry is going, in my opinion. You know, it's a bridge between what was and what is to come. And I think stuff like this is part of that what is to come, in my opinion. Whether we like it or not as hardcore frag heads, that's a completely different story. This very synthetic type of perfumery, you know, sometimes I can make myself appreciate it, but then again, many times when I wear something like this, the next day, I just want to reach for like Mitsuko or something. You know what I mean? Like, I can't help myself. But yeah, I mean, Ganymede is by far, has to be #1 on this list. So if you have experience with more Quentin Bisch creations, I'd love to know your thoughts. I'd love to know if anyone else has heard this rumor about Hermes, or just what you think of Quentin Bisch as a perfumer. Thanks for watching, everybody. It's a pleasure. Cheers, guys, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.